The most effective way to strip a person of their autonomy is not to threaten them. It is to make them believe they are deeply indebted. You have likely lived this exact scenario. Someone stepped into your life with overwhelming warmth. Perhaps a new colleague in your department, a charming romantic partner, or a charismatic mentor with a wide network. Within weeks, before any real foundation existed, they handed you an unearned privilege, an expensive timepiece, access to exclusive circles, or an all-expenses-paid trip you never requested. Your peers told you how fortunate you were. You smiled, accepted the gesture, and felt an unfamiliar sense of elevation. But then came the pivot. A month later, when this person demanded private details about your life, expected you to cover for their ethical shortcuts, or assumed your undivided availability at midnight, you felt a suffocating knot in your chest. Saying no felt strangely cruel. Establishing a basic boundary felt like an unforgivable betrayal. In that quiet moment of paralysis, the reality became clear. You were not being elevated, you were being acquired. In his classic treatises on dominion and statecraft, Niccolò Machiavelli observed that men are bound as much by the benefits they confer as by those they receive. The master strategist does not storm the fortress when the gates can be unlocked from the inside using the illusion of benevolence. Most people move through the world, assuming that social generosity is inherently innocent. They have been conditioned from childhood to believe that suspicion in the presence of kindness is cynicism. But in the real theater of human nature, kindness is frequently deployed as reconnaissance. It measures your boundaries, it maps your vulnerabilities, and most importantly, it manufactures an unwritten psychological contract that you never agreed to sign. When an individual gives before they have earned the right to give, they are not expressing affection. They are establishing jurisdiction over your future choices. The first trap disguised as generosity is the oversized gift delivered far too early in an acquaintance. We can call this the acceleration trap. Authentic human connection is inherently slow, inefficient, and earned. It requires months, sometimes years, of observing someone under pressure, witnessing how they handle disappointment, and navigating minor friction. Real trust is a structural foundation built brick by brick through reciprocal consistency. The manipulator, however, does not possess the discipline or the character to survive that evaluation. Instead, they attempt to purchase the privileges of a 5-year relationship in less than 20. They present you with a high-value asset, a personal loan, or a lavish lifestyle upgrade, before you even know their true patterns of behavior. The item itself may be exquisite, but its functional purpose is purely tactical, to bypass your natural skepticism and force an artificial intimacy where only cautious curiosity should exist. The psychological mechanism at work here is the calculated weaponization of reciprocity. When human beings receive something of immense value, their internal equilibrium is disrupted until they can balance the scale. If an acquaintance does you a massive, unprovoked favor, your subconscious mind immediately registers an emotional deficit. You feel an instinctual, biological pressure to compensate. Because you cannot match their financial or social resources at that early stage, you begin paying in the only currency immediately available to you: compliance, emotional access, and lowered vigilance. You start sharing personal vulnerabilities that you would normally guard behind heavy walls. You allow them into your private circle, introduce them to your family, or grant them unearned influence over your strategic decisions. You tell yourself that someone who gives so freely must have honorable intentions. In reality, you have surrendered your perimeter for a polished token, and the giver knows it. To survive these dynamics, you must learn to separate the physical gift from the giver's strategic objective. A true gift leaves your freedom intact. A trap leaves your choices pre-written. When a sincere person offers you something substantial, their emotional posture remains entirely detached from your response. If you show hesitation, they step back without resentment. If you decline, their demeanor remains balanced, calm, and respectful. They understand that boundaries protect both parties from future distortion. But when a predatory player hands you an oversized gesture, the transaction is strictly conditional. The easiest way to identify this trap before it tightens around your throat is to deliberately introduce friction. Tell them the gift is too grand for the current stage of your relationship. State calmly that you appreciate the thought, but prefer to move at a measured, deliberate pace. Watch their face closely in the seconds after you decline. The mask of the generous beneficer will slip instantly, because the gift was never an act of altruism. It was an aggressive investment designed to secure leverage. Your refusal will be interpreted as a financial loss and a psychological defeat. They will not respect your discernment. They will exhibit cold resentment, performative hurt, or subtle contempt. They will remind you of how much effort they expended, accuse you of being paranoid, or tell mutual acquaintances that you are ungrateful and emotionally cold. That sudden shift in temperature is the true price tag. It is the unmasked demand for ownership that was hidden beneath the velvet ribbon from the very beginning. By refusing to let them buy unearned closeness, you have rendered their tactical investment completely worthless. Never permit the monetary value of an offering to dictate the speed of your allegiance. In modern social ecosystems, access to your mind, your time, and your reputation is the ultimate prize. Once you establish a precedent that your boundaries can be purchased with high-end dinners, luxury accessories, or unvetted career favors, you broadcast to every opportunist in your environment that your sovereignty has a retail price. A strategist values their autonomy far more than any temporary elevation an outsider can manufacture. If an alliance has not survived the slow test of time, no physical object should be allowed to accelerate its trajectory. Keep your standards high, your pace slow, and your perimeter guarded. Yet, some players are far too sophisticated to rely entirely on private manipulation. When an intelligent operator realizes that you possess the internal resolve to decline an oversized gift in private, they will simply change the battlefield. They will ensure that the next transaction does not occur in a quiet room between two people, but under the bright lights of an audience, where your hesitation will be witnessed, judged, and weaponized against your social survival. That is the moment the theater of compliance begins. When private manipulation is no longer effective, the sophisticated operator does not retreat. They escalate, they change the environment. You might be at a quarterly company dinner, surrounded by peers and executives, or at a crowded family celebration where cameras are already raised. The room grows quiet. The person holding the leverage stands up, offers a warm, charismatic speech about your value, and hands you an expensive token of appreciation, a surprise promotion, or an intimate gesture that you specifically asked them not to make. The crowd applauds, leaning in to witness your joy. But you do not feel joy. You feel the sudden, crushing weight of 50 pairs of eyes watching you, expecting a performance. In that exact moment, if you hesitate, if you look uncomfortable, or if you dare to decline the gesture, you instantly become the antagonist of a story you never wrote. This is the second mechanism of control, the public gift. It relies entirely on the theater of compliance. The manipulator understands a fundamental law of human behavior. People are inherently terrified of disrupting social harmony. In a private setting, you possess the psychological space to interrogate a suspicious offer. You can ask clarifying questions, request time to think, or firmly decline without collateral damage. But a crowd neutralizes your defenses. The audience is not privy to the cold reality of your relationship with the giver. They do not know about the passive-aggressive messages, the toxic workplace expectations, or the boundaries this person has consistently violated behind closed doors. All the audience sees is a beautiful box with a bright ribbon, and they expect your immediate, visible gratitude in return. By placing a physical object or an opportunity in your hands while an audience watches, the giver has essentially recruited every person in the room as their silent enforcer. The social pressure to conform acts as an invisible straitjacket. The giver has forced a situation where rejecting the object requires you to socially humiliate both them and yourself. If your boss publicly gifts you a high-status corporate award, while subtly implying that you will lead an exhausting new initiative, rejecting the role means appearing ungrateful and uncooperative in front of the entire leadership team. If a manipulative partner presents you with a lavish anniversary trip right after a bitter private argument about their controlling behavior, saying no in front of smiling friends turns you into the cold, unyielding villain. The giver plays the martyr. You play the monster. Consider the precise mechanics of a grand public gesture when the foundation of the relationship is already fractured. You may have recently established a firm boundary. You may have asked for space or demanded professional respect. The manipulator senses their control slipping. Instead of doing the quiet, unglamorous work of repairing the damage, they orchestrate a spectacle. They invite your closest network. They purchase something that looks undeniably generous to an outside observer. When they present it, they effectively blindfold the audience to their past transgressions. The crowd becomes a jury that has only been shown the defense's evidence. Because human beings rely heavily on social proof to determine reality. When dozens of people around you are smiling and nodding, your own nervous system begins to doubt its own memory. You wonder if perhaps you were too harsh, too critical, or too demanding. The manipulator relies on this internal collapse. They want the applause of the room to drown out the quiet voice of your intuition. You must understand the cold reality of this move. A sincere gesture is designed to make the receiver feel valued, secure, and respected. A public trap is designed to back you into a corner where compliance is the only socially acceptable exit. The manipulator is not giving you a gift. They are taking a hostage. They are weaponizing your own reputation against you, banking on the fact that you will swallow your discomfort rather than create a scene. And the moment you force a smile, accept the token, and say the words they want to hear, they have won. They have secured a visual, public receipt of your acceptance. Later, when they extract the hidden cost, whether it is uncompensated overtime, financial reliance, or emotional submission, they will use this exact memory to trap you. They will remind you that you seemed so happy, that you accepted their generosity in front of everyone, and that your current resistance is completely irrational. Defeating the theater of compliance requires supreme emotional control. You must detach your internal state from the expectations of the crowd. When the trap is sprung in public, your immediate biological instinct will be panic or submission. Suppress it. You do not need to flip the table or launch into a dramatic refusal that feeds their narrative of your instability. A true strategist knows how to accept the physical object while entirely rejecting the psychological contract attached to it. You smile thinly, you say the minimum required to satisfy protocol. You might state quietly that the gesture is entirely unexpected and that you will discuss what it means for your dynamic in private tomorrow. You accept the physical item, but you do not open it. You thank them for the thought, but you deliberately refuse to validate the hidden conditions. Let the silence stretch. Let the crowd feel a subtle, unexplainable chill. The manipulator wanted a flawless performance. You are giving them polite diplomacy. By delaying the emotional payoff, you neutralize their ambush without violating social norms. You maintain your composure, and more importantly, you protect your autonomy. When you finally speak in private the next day, you return the item or decline the condition with absolute firmness. If they erupt in anger, reminding you of how generous they looked in public and how much money they spent, you will know with absolute certainty that the entire display was calculated theater. They did not care about your happiness. They cared about cornering you on a public stage. The audience eventually goes home, the applause fades, and the social pressure dissolves. But the most insidious psychological maneuvers do not always require a crowd. Sometimes, the most dangerous object handed to you is delivered in complete isolation, right after the giver has caused you profound emotional or professional damage, and they need a transactional shortcut to buy their way out of accountability. The audience eventually disperses, the applause fades, and the heavy social pressure dissolves into memory. But the most insidious psychological maneuvers do not always require a crowd to witness them. Sometimes, the most dangerous object handed to you is delivered in complete isolation, arriving right after the giver has caused you profound emotional or professional damage, and they desperately need a transactional shortcut to buy their way out of accountability. This is the third mechanism of control, the counterfeit repair. Imagine the morning after a severe violation of your trust. Perhaps a senior colleague deliberately took credit for your months of hard work during a high-stakes board meeting, or a romantic partner was caught in a deep, undeniable lie. The betrayal is fresh. You spent the entire night mapping out your boundaries, mentally preparing to demand structural changes in the relationship or walk away entirely. But before you can speak, they hand you something exceptional. A premium espresso machine appears on your desk. A pristine box containing a luxury watch is placed quietly on your kitchen counter. You look at them, waiting for the painful, vulnerable conversation to begin. Instead, they offer a warm, slightly dismissive smile and say that they just wanted you to have something nice after a stressful week. There is no apology. There is no admission of guilt. There is only the object. This is the architecture of transactional absolution. When a manipulator realizes they have crossed a lethal line, they know that a genuine apology would require them to surrender a massive amount of interpersonal power. A real apology demands vulnerability. It requires them to validate your anger, admit their moral or professional failure, and submit to a period of behavioral probation while trust is slowly rebuilt. A dark tactician absolutely refuses to inhabit that position of weakness. To circumvent this loss of leverage, they deploy a physical asset as an emotional bribe. They are betting heavily on your natural human aversion to conflict. They know that initiating a bitter confrontation while holding a beautiful, expensive item feels deeply unnatural to a decent person. When you hold their peace offering, you experience an immediate surge of cognitive dissonance. Your nervous system is screaming with valid anger from the betrayal, but your social conditioning demands you express gratitude for the present. This internal conflict is not an accident, it is the exact psychological paralysis the tactician engineered. They are using your own manners as a weapon against your self-preservation. In that moment of hesitation, your mind plays a dangerous trick on you. You tell yourself that the gift secretly represents their remorse, even though they carefully avoided voicing it. You accept the item, force a tight smile, and swallow your demands to keep the peace. Here is the cold, unsettling truth you must face. The core issue is no longer just their manipulation, it is the signal you broadcast to them the moment you accept that box. By taking the object instead of demanding the conversation, you just handed them a printed receipt for your self-respect. You taught them the exact market rate for your boundaries. They now know precisely how much it costs to betray you. The next time they lie, sabotage your reputation, or disrespect your time, they do not have to worry about the hard labor of changing their character. They simply have to check their bank balance. You have accidentally trained them to be a repeat offender. This dynamic scales across every power structure in modern life. Consider a corporate leadership team that enforces 6 months of brutal, uncompensated overtime, quietly destroying the mental health of their staff. Instead of adjusting the workload, hiring more personnel, or fixing the operational failure, the executives authorize an all-expenses-paid weekend retreat for the division. They hand out small, insignificant bonuses. The underlying abuse remains entirely intact, masked by a shallow token of appreciation. Or observe a toxic parent who humiliates you in front of your spouse during a holiday dinner, then suddenly wires a large sum of money into your account the next morning, expecting the cash to silently erase the abuse. The object acts as a visual bandage placed over a festering wound. If you attempt to bring up the original betrayal days later, the trap violently snaps shut. The manipulator will instantly turn the tables, pointing to the gift as undeniable proof of their benevolence and your irrationality. They will accuse you of living in the past, holding grudges, and being utterly impossible to please after everything they have done for you. They pivot from the offender to the victim with seamless precision. A true gift leaves your freedom intact. A trap leaves your choices pre-written. By accepting the bribe, your script was already written. You were designated to play the role of the grateful, silent subordinate. You must learn to recognize the absolute difference between a gift that follows an apology and a gift that replaces one. The former arrives only after the hard work of accountability is complete. The person has named the harm, listened to the damage they caused, and altered their behavior. The gift is merely a secondary symbol of repair. The latter, however, is a decoy. It is thrown onto the path to distract you from the fact that the predator is not changing their direction at all. When you are handed an emotional bribe, you must maintain absolute emotional discipline. Do not let the shiny surface blind you to the rot underneath. You do not have to scream, cause a scene, or throw the object back at them. The most lethal response to manipulation is a calm, flat, and immovable rejection. You push the item gently across the desk or table, you look them directly in the eyes, and state that while the gesture is noted, it does not replace the conversation that is going to happen right now. If they value you, they will accept the discomfort. If they are trying to manage you, they will immediately resort to anger, because their attempt to purchase absolution on the cheap just failed. But emotional bribes are not the only physical traps designed to drain your resources. Sometimes the danger is not what the gift makes you forgive, it is what the gift literally forces you to maintain. You must understand that not every manipulative offering is designed to extract immediate emotional compliance. Some are designed to quietly transfer a massive operational burden from their ledger to yours, disguised perfectly as an act of immense generosity. We call this the Trojan Horse Asset. You receive an incredible piece of news. A wealthy relative decides to hand you the keys to a stunning vintage automobile they no longer use, or an investor gifts you a vacant commercial property in a developing neighborhood. The price tag is zero. Your friends are entirely envious. They tell you how fortunate you are to receive such a massive leap forward in your personal wealth. But the moment the title is transferred into your name, the reality of the trap begins to unfold. The vintage car requires specialized imported parts, constant mechanical oversight, and exorbitant insurance premiums. The free property carries a history of unpaid local taxes, quiet structural decay, and pending legal disputes with the city. The giver paid for the initial purchase years ago, but you will pay for the upkeep with your time, your capital, and your peace of mind. The transaction was entirely asymmetric. The giver received the immediate psychological reward and social prestige of being a magnanimous benefactor. They get to smile at family gatherings and casually mention how much they have done to establish your foundation. Meanwhile, they successfully amputated a bleeding asset from their own life and grafted it onto yours. They did not give you a gift. They handed you a parasite. This strategy is exceptionally lethal because it weaponizes your own pride against your pragmatic judgment. When a high-level opportunist wants you to carry their heavy bags, they do not ask you for a favor. They offer you an honor. This dynamic is most frequently executed in modern corporate environments through the vehicle of unearned prestige. Imagine being pulled into an executive office late on a Friday afternoon. Your superior looks at you with deep, manufactured respect. They tell you that you are the only person capable of handling a crucial, high-stakes initiative. They confer upon you a powerful new title, perhaps Director of Special Projects or Head of Turnaround Operations. You feel an immediate surge of validation. Your savior complex is activated, and your ego insists that you have finally been recognized. But when you sit down at your desk the next morning and finally look at the internal metrics, the cold truth settles in. The division you were handed is chronically underfunded. The team you inherited is fundamentally toxic and deeply resistant to change. The project timeline established by the board is mathematically impossible to achieve. Your superior did not promote you. They simply needed a scapegoat for an impending disaster that was already in motion. They took a catastrophic operational liability that would have ruined their own career, wrapped it in a shiny corporate title, and handed it to you. Because they packaged it as a rare, exclusive opportunity, your ego blinded you to the fact that you were just handed a live grenade. A true gift leaves your freedom intact. A trap leaves your choices pre-written. Once you accept the title and the office, your choices are locked. If you fail to turn the division around, the failure is yours, attached forever to your professional reputation. If you complain about the lack of resources, the manipulator will shake their head and express polite disappointment in your inability to rise to the occasion. They will remind you that heavy is the head that wears the crown, conveniently ignoring the fact that they were the ones who placed a lead crown on your head to save their own reputation. The architecture of this trap relies heavily on the speed of your acceptance. Manipulators know that if you pause to calculate the long-term maintenance costs of a so-called free asset, you will inevitably decline. Therefore, they always introduce artificial urgency. They tell you that another colleague is eagerly waiting for the role and will take it if you do not sign today. They insist the property transfer must happen by the end of the fiscal quarter. They keep your focus entirely on the fear of missing out, deliberately blinding you to the far more dangerous fear of being trapped in. To defend against the Trojan horse, you must cultivate a ruthless, almost surgical pragmatism. You must train your mind to ignore the superficial prestige of the initial offer and immediately project the reality of the asset into the future. When handed a physical object, a new operational responsibility, or a high-status title, you must actively strip away the flattery. Ask the cold, mechanical questions. Who pays the taxes on this entity? What is the historic turnover rate for this specific management position? If this project fails, whose budget absorbs the financial loss? Where is the hidden upkeep, and who holds the legal liability when the foundation cracks? If the giver is sincere, they will welcome these pragmatic questions. A mentor who genuinely wants to elevate your career will sit down with you, open the ledger, and clearly outline the risks and resources associated with the new role. They will ensure you are protected from the fallout, but a dark tactician will respond to your analytical questions with defensive hostility. They will accuse you of overthinking. They will question your ambition, suggesting that perhaps you simply do not have the drive or the vision to handle such a generous opportunity. Their frustration is the only metric you need. It proves that the gift was never meant to empower you. It was meant to exploit you. Material burdens drain your bank account and your calendar. You can calculate the damage of a failing project or a broken engine, and you can eventually cut your losses. But the most sophisticated tacticians do not deal in physical liabilities. They deal in shadows. The true danger emerges when the gift demands a currency far more expensive than your money or your time. It demands your silence, dragging you across the threshold of complicity. This is the fifth and final evolution of the trap. It begins quietly, the door closes, the manipulator's voice drops to a low, confidential register. They hand you an unearned advantage, an envelope of cash with no paper trail, access to a confidential file, or a shortcut that strictly violates the established rules of your environment. They look you in the eyes and tell you that nobody else needs to know. You feel a sudden rush of adrenaline. You feel selected. You tell yourself that you are finally being initiated into the inner circle where the real game is played. What you do not realize in that quiet room is that you are not being elevated. You are being recruited as an accomplice. When you accept a gift that relies on secrecy, the relationship permanently mutates. You now possess a piece of leverage that could potentially destroy the giver, but the tactician knows the board far better than you do. They understand that by accepting the secret, your hands are no longer clean. They have engineered a state of shared guilt. If an investigation occurs, or if the social dynamic unravels, they will ensure that your name is inextricably tied to the infraction. The secret was never a favor. It was a psychological insurance policy taken out against your future disobedience. This complicity contract is merely the foundation for the ultimate mechanism of control, which we can call the stolen crown. Up until this point, the traps have involved physical objects, public spectacles, or concealed information. But the most sophisticated predators do not want to merely control your actions. They want to capture your entire identity. They find you at a moment of vulnerability or transition. They step in as the visionary mentor, the powerful benefactor, or the elite partner. They introduce you to a high-status network. They upgrade your lifestyle, your wardrobe, and the very rooms you are allowed to walk into. They give you a title that commands respect from strangers. They place a crown on your head, and for a long time you feel like royalty. You start to view your old life as remarkably small, and you feel a profound, overwhelming gratitude toward the person who rescued you from obscurity. But the crown was never yours. It was always on loan. The tactician knows that once your self-worth becomes entirely dependent on the status they provide, you will do absolutely anything to prevent them from taking it away. The trap snaps shut the moment they ask for their first moral compromise. It is never framed as a threat. It is delivered as a soft reminder of loyalty. They ask you to look the other way while they dismantle a colleague's career. They ask you to sign a document you know is factually distorted. They ask you to ruthlessly cut off a longtime friend who has started asking uncomfortable questions about your new benefactor. Your conscience violently objects, but your fear overrides it. You realize with a cold, sinking feeling that if you refuse, they will simply strip you of the title, the access, and the network. You will be exiled back to the life you just learned to despise. You begin to rationalize the compromise. You tell yourself that loyalty requires flexibility, that the real world operates in shades of gray, and that one small ethical sacrifice is a fair price to pay for such massive success. That rationalization is the sound of the cell door locking. A true gift leaves your freedom intact. A trap leaves your choices pre-written. By accepting the crown without building your own sovereign foundation, your choices were narrowed down to a single path of complete obedience. You are no longer an independent operator. You are an extension of their will. They do not need to raise their voice or issue ultimatums, because your own terror of losing your new identity does all the enforcing for them. You have become a warden in your own psychological prison. To navigate the lethal realities of power dynamics, you must accept a fundamental, unyielding truth. Anything you cannot afford to walk away from already owns you. If your entire professional reputation, your financial stability, and your sense of self-rest in the hands of a single gatekeeper, you are living in a state of terminal vulnerability. The dark strategist preys on those who are so hungry for elevation that they refuse to look at the structural integrity of the staircase. To break this final chain, you must deliberately build an identity that survives the removal of the crown. You must cultivate skills that belong entirely to you, maintain networks outside of their sphere of influence, and secure your own financial baseline. Independence is not about rejecting help or refusing opportunity. It is about ensuring that if the benefactor suddenly turns into a tyrant, you have the operational capacity to place the crown gently on the table and walk out of the room without looking back. Tomorrow, the game continues. Someone in your proximity will offer you a shortcut, a sudden elevation, or a gesture that feels just a fraction too generous for the history you share. Your biological impulse will urge you to accept it, to feel validated, to avoid the heavy friction of suspicion. Deny that impulse. Look past the bright ribbon, the public applause, and the whispered promise of an elite secret. Ask yourself the only question that matters in the architecture of power. What exactly am I expected to become the moment my fingers close around this object? If the answer is quieter, smaller, more compliant, or eternally indebted, then you are not looking at a gift. You are looking at a beautifully polished collar. Leave it on the table. Let the silence stretch. Let them realize that your sovereignty has no market price.